It was an ordinary Tuesday. At least, that's what I thought. High school in a small town is usually forgettable. Just rows of lockers, the smell of old floor wax, and the constant drone of teachers talking about things that don't matter. I was in the library, tucked away in the back corner, trying to finish an essay before my next period. The library was my escape. It was silent, peaceful, until the intercom clicked on. Usually, it's just an announcement about football practice or a lost set of keys. But this time, the voice was different. It was Mrs. Miller, the principal's secretary. She sounded terrified. Lockdown, lockdown. This is not a drill, teachers. Secure your rooms, students. Hide. The line went dead with a sharp, chilling static. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the librarian, Miss Gable. She wasn't moving. She was just staring at the intercom, her face turning a sickly shade of white. Suddenly, she snapped into action. She rushed to the heavy oak doors, locked them, and turned off the lights. Total darkness. I crawled under one of the heavy wooden tables, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. I could hear other students in the room, the sound of fabric rubbing against carpet, the muffled sobs of a girl somewhere near the bookshelves. "Stay quiet," Miss Gable whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't make a sound." Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Time feels different when you're waiting for something terrible to happen. Then, I heard it. The heavy, metallic thud of the front doors of the school swinging open. Slow, heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. They weren't the footsteps of a teacher or a security guard. These were deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was getting closer to the library. I pressed my face against the cold floor, praying my phone wouldn't buzz, praying I wouldn't sneeze. The footsteps stopped right outside the library door. I held my breath. My lungs felt like they were going to burst. Then, the doorknob jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. They twisted the handle, harder and harder, until the metal groaned under the pressure. And then, a voice, a low, gravelly whisper from the other side of the wood. "I know you're in there, little lambs." The silence that followed was worse than any scream. Who was this person? And how did they get past security? The handle stopped rattling, but the silence was even more terrifying. I stared at the gap at the bottom of the library door. A shadow blocked the dim light from the hallway. He was still there, just standing, waiting. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sensation felt like an electric shock. I moved with agonizing slowness, pulling it out, praying the screen brightness wouldn't give me away. It was a text from my best friend, Leo. "Don't go near the windows. He has a rifle." My blood turned to ice. I looked toward the back of the library. There were floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the faculty parking lot. If he was outside, he could see everything. I checked the time. It had only been 12 minutes since the lockdown began. It felt like a lifetime. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the other side of the school. A window breaking, or a gunshot. The shadow at the library door finally moved. The footsteps started again, moving away toward the sound of the crash. Miss Gable crawled over to me, her eyes wide with panic. She leaned into my ear, her breath hot and shaky. "We need to move to the storage closet," she whispered. "The main area is too open." One by one, the 12 of us in the library began to crawl. It was a slow, pathetic parade of shadows. Every time a floorboard creaked, we all froze, paralyzed by the thought of a bullet tearing through the door. We made it into the small, cramped storage room. It smelled like dust and old paper. Miss Gable shut the door and slid a heavy metal shelf in front of it. We were safe, for now. But then, the girl next to me, Sarah, pointed at the corner of the room. There was a small air vent near the ceiling, and from inside the vent, we heard a rhythmic, scraping sound. Scratch, 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 like metal claws dragging against tin. "Is that the ventilation system?" someone whispered. "No," I replied, my voice barely audible. "That sounds like someone is inside the walls." The scratching stopped right above our heads. We all looked up, staring at the thin metal grate of the vent. A single, pale finger poked through one of the slots. Then another. The vent cover began to unscrew. From the inside, my heart wasn't just beating anymore. It was exploding. He wasn't trying to get through the door. He was already in the ceiling. I gripped the leg of a chair, the only weapon I could find. The vent cover fell, hitting the carpet with a dull thud. And then, we saw it. 2 eyes, dark and hollow, peering down at us from the darkness of the ceiling. He wasn't a student. He wasn't a parent. He was smiling. "Found you," he hissed. The vent cover bounced off the floor, but nobody screamed. We were too terrified to make a sound. The man in the ceiling didn't drop down immediately. He just stayed there, watching us. His face was streaked with dirt and grease, making his teeth look unnaturally white when he smiled. "So many little birds," he whispered. Ms. Gable grabbed a heavy stapler from a shelf, her hand shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She pointed it at the hole in the ceiling. "Get out," she hissed. "The police are on their way." The man laughed. It was a dry, raspy sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. "The police are busy at the main entrance," he said. "They like the distraction I left for them." The distraction, the crash I heard earlier. He had planned this. Suddenly, he lunged, not at us, but at the light fixture next to the vent. He ripped the wires out, and the storage room plunged into total darkness. I heard the sound of metal groaning as he began to lower himself down. "Scatter," I yelled. The room turned into chaos. I felt someone's shoulder slam into mine. I heard shelves being knocked over, books hitting the floor, and the heavy breathing of a dozen panicked teenagers. I scrambled toward the door, the one we had barricaded with the metal shelf. "Help me move it," I shouted into the blackness. I felt hands grabbing the shelf beside me. We pushed with everything we had. The metal screeched against the floor, the sound so loud it felt like it was tearing my ears apart. Behind us, I heard a t-t. He was down. He was in the room with us. I heard a metallic click, the sound of a folding knife snapping open. "I like it when they run," the voice said, right behind me. I didn't look back. I jammed my shoulder against the shelf and gave one final, desperate shove. The shelf tipped. The door was clear. I ripped the door open and we burst back into the main library. But it wasn't empty anymore. The emergency lights were flickering, casting a sickening red glow over the room. And standing near the library's exit was another figure, tall, wearing a tactical vest, and holding a long, black rifle. We stopped dead in our tracks. The man from the ceiling stepped out of the storage room behind us, his knife glistening in the red light. We were trapped. The man with the rifle raised his weapon, aiming it straight at our group. "Don't move," the gunman barked. But then, he didn't point the gun at us. He pointed it at the man with the knife. "Who the hell are you?" the gunman asked. My brain couldn't process it. There wasn't just one intruder. There were two, and they didn't seem to be working together. The red light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the rows of books. 2 monsters were in the room, one with a knife, and one with a rifle. The man from the ceiling froze. He gripped his knife tighter, his knuckles turning white. He looked at the gunman, then back at us, like a predator deciding which prey to strike first. "This is my game," the man with the knife hissed. The gunman didn't flinch. He adjusted his grip on the rifle. "I don't know who you are, but you're in my way." The tension in the air was suffocating. We were caught in the middle of a nightmare, a standoff between 2 different types of evil. Leo grabbed my arm, leaning in close. "The window," he whispered. "Now." While the 2 men stared each other down, we began to back away slowly, inch by inch, toward the large windows at the back of the library. Suddenly, the gunman fired. The explosion of the gunshot was deafening in the small space. The man with the knife dived behind a heavy oak table, just as the bullet shattered, a glass display case behind him. "Run!" I screamed. We didn't care about being quiet anymore. We bolted for the windows. I grabbed a heavy wooden chair and swung it with every bit of strength I had left. The glass shattered. Cool night air rushed into the room. It felt like life itself. One by one, students began jumping out. It was a 10-foot drop to the pavement below, but nobody hesitated. I was the last one at the ledge. I looked back for a split second. The gunman was advancing, firing into the shadows where the ceiling man was hiding. It was a war zone. I jumped. I hit the ground hard, a sharp pain shooting through my ankle, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the tree line, toward the flashing blue and red lights of the SWAT teams finally swarming the front of the school. Hands grabbed me. Blue uniforms. Police. I've got one. Over here, a voice shouted. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, watching as officers rushed past me toward the broken window. The lockdown lasted another 3 hours. They found the gunman in the hallway. He had been tackled by a teacher who jumped him from behind. But the man from the ceiling, the one with the knife? When the police searched the library, all they found was the open vent and a trail of greasy fingerprints leading back into the darkness of the walls. He was gone. The school stayed closed for a month. They installed cameras, metal detectors, and reinforced every vent in the building. But I never went back. Sometimes, when it's late at night and the house is quiet, I hear a faint, rhythmic sound coming from inside my bedroom walls. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And I wonder if he's still looking for his little birds. I always liked the night shift. It was quiet, lonely, and it paid well. My job was simple. Watch the monitors, walk the perimeter, and make sure the doors stayed locked. I worked at the Blackwood Medical Research Center, a massive concrete fortress on the edge of town. It was 2 a.m., the kind of hour where the silence starts to feel heavy. I was sitting in the security booth, sipping cold coffee, staring at the grid of 16 camera feeds. Most of them were just empty hallways and flickering fluorescent lights. Everything was normal, until I saw it on camera 4, the basement morgue entrance. A door that hadn't been opened in years started to creak, slowly, inch by inch. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes strained against the static. There was no one there. No shadow. No movement. Just a heavy steel door opening into a dark hallway. Probably just a faulty latch, I muttered to myself, but my hands were sweating. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio. I had to go down there. That was the rule. The elevator ride felt like it took an eternity. Ding! The door slid open to the basement. The air was colder here, smelling of bleach and something rotten. I shined my light down the long, narrow corridor. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint and rusted pipes. I reached the door of the morgue. It was wide open now. I stepped inside, the floor crunching under my boots. It was just a room full of empty metal cabinets. Cold. Dead. I reached out to grab the handle to pull it shut, when my radio hissed a life. It was just static at first, high-pitched, ear-piercing static. And then, a voice. It wasn't the dispatcher. It was a child's voice, small, distant, and terrified. "Help me. He's coming back." I froze. I looked around the empty room. There was no one there. "Who is this?" I whispered into the radio. "State your location." The radio crackled again. "Look. Behind the curtain." My heart stopped. In the corner of the room, there was a single, plastic medical curtain. It was moving. Slowly. A pair of small, pale feet appeared from beneath the fabric, but they weren't touching the floor. They were dangling, swinging back and forth in the air. The feet swung back and forth, with a rhythmic creak that echoed against the tiled walls. I couldn't move. My boots felt like they were made of lead. I shined the flashlight beam directly onto the curtain. The plastic was translucent, showing a blurry, thin silhouette of a small figure. "The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice." "Is someone there?" I choked out. The swinging stopped. The feet touched the ground, but there was no sound of impact. No thud, no footsteps. The curtain was ripped aside with a violent snap. There was nothing. The corner was empty. No child, no body. Just a rusted metal gurney sitting exactly where the feet had been dangling. I stood there, gasping for air, my flashlight shaking in my grip. I was losing my mind. The night shift does that to you. It makes you see things that aren't there. Suddenly, my radio chirped again, but this time, it wasn't the child. It was my supervisor, Marcus, from the main desk. "Hey, Elias, what the hell are you doing on camera 4? I grabbed the radio, my voice trembling. "Marcus, I'm in the morgue. Something is wrong down here." There was a long silence. The static hummed in my ear. "Elias, get out of there," Marcus said, his voice sounding strange, flat. "You're not supposed to be in the morgue." "What do you mean?" I saw the door open on the monitor. "Elias, listen to me carefully," Marcus whispered. "I'm looking at the basement feed right now. The morgue door is closed, and you aren't standing in front of it." My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "I'm right here. I can see the gurney. I can smell the bleach. I see you, Elias. But you're standing at the end of the hallway, staring at a blank wall, and there is someone, or something, standing right behind you." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I felt a cold, damp breath on the back of my neck. It smelled like old earth and decayed meat. A hand, thin and gray, slowly reached over my shoulder. The skin was peeling back from the fingernails. It reached for my radio. I didn't wait. I didn't look. I bolted. I ran toward the elevator, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. I hit the call button a dozen times, screaming for the doors to open. "Please, please, please." The elevator doors groaned open. I jumped inside and slammed the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, I looked back into the hallway. Standing in the center of the corridor, under a flickering light, was Marcus. But it wasn't Marcus. His jaw was hanging at an impossible angle, and his eyes were nothing but empty, black sockets. He raised his hand, waving goodbye. As the doors finally shut, the elevator began to rise. But then, it shuddered. A loud, metallic snap echoed through the shaft. The elevator stopped, between floors. The elevator swayed, creaking like a dying ship. I was suspended in total darkness. The emergency lights didn't kick in. The silence was so thick I could hear the blood rushing through my ears. Thump. Something hit the top of the elevator car. I looked up, staring at the small emergency hatch in the ceiling. The metal groaned under the weight of something heavy. Thump. Thump. It was walking up there slowly, methodically. I reached for my radio, but it was gone. It must have dropped when I ran from the morgue. I was completely, utterly alone. Then, the scratching started. Long, sharp nails began to drag across the outer metal of the elevator. The sound was like teeth on a chalkboard. He'd circled the hatch, searching for a way in. I backed into the corner, pressing my spine against the cold steel wall. I gripped my flashlight like a club. Suddenly, the hatch rattled. The lock on the outside snapped, and the square metal door was pushed open. I shined my light upward. A face peered down. It wasn't the monster that looked like Marcus. It was the child from the morgue. Her skin was a translucent, sickly blue. Her hair floated around her head as if she were underwater. "He's here," she whispered. Her voice didn't come from her mouth. It echoed inside my brain. "Who?" I gasped. "Who is here?" She pointed a thin finger behind me, toward the back wall of the elevator. I turned around. The steel wall of the elevator was melting, or at least, it looked like it. Dark, oily shadows were seeping through the cracks of the elevator doors. The shadows began to take shape. A tall, spindly figure, nearly 7 feet tall, with limbs that were far too long for its body. It had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where a mask should be. It didn't use the doors. It walked through the metal. The temperature in the elevator dropped until I could see my own breath. The child in the hatch screamed, a sound so high-pitched it shattered the glass cover of the elevator's floor buttons. The tall figure reached out a hand. Its fingers were like needles, stretching toward my throat. I did the only thing I could. I jumped. I grabbed the edge of the open hatch and hauled myself upward, kicking wildly as the thin, cold fingers brushed against my boot. I scrambled onto the top of the elevator car, into the dark, grease-covered elevator shaft. I looked down through the hatch. The tall man was standing there, looking up at me. He didn't have eyes, but I knew he was staring. Then, he began to climb. He didn't use his hands. He simply floated upward, his body defying gravity, drifting toward the hatch like a ghost. I looked up the shaft. There was a maintenance ladder 10 feet above me. "Climb!" The girl's voice echoed again. I leaped for the ladder, my fingers catching the rusted iron rung just as a cold, wet hand gripped my ankle. It pulled hard. My grip slipped. I was dangling over a 50-foot drop, with a monster trying to drag me back into the dark. My fingers screamed as they burned against the rusted iron. The grip on my ankle was like a vice, cold, heavy, and tightening. I looked down. The faceless man was inches away, his pale, smooth head tilted, watching me struggle. "Not today," I roared. I kicked back with my free leg, slamming my heavy work boot into the creature's chest. There was no solid impact. It felt like kicking a bag of wet sand, but it was enough. The creature hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe, and its grip loosened. I hauled myself up the ladder, hand over hand, my muscles tearing. I didn't look back. I climbed until I reached the heavy steel doors of the lobby floor. I jammed my fingers into the center crack of the doors and pushed. They didn't budge. Below me, the scratching started again. Scritch, scritch, scritch. He was coming up the cables, fast. I looked at the door mechanism. A small emergency lever. I grabbed it and yanked it down with every ounce of strength I had left. The doors groaned and slid open just enough for me to squeeze through. I tumbled onto the lobby floor, gasping, my chest heaving. The lobby was bathed in the pale blue light of the moon. I didn't stop to rest. I ran for the main exit. But as I reached the glass revolving doors, I saw him. Marcus, my supervisor. He was sitting behind the security desk, perfectly still. His jaw wasn't hanging anymore. He looked normal. "Elias?" he asked, looking up from his coffee. "Where have you been? You've been off the monitors for 20 minutes. I stopped, my hand on the glass door. "Marcus, you're okay?" "Of course I'm okay," he said, a small, strange smile creeping across his face. "Why wouldn't I be?" I looked down at his desk. There, sitting next to his coffee cup, was my radio, the one I had dropped in the basement. It was covered in wet, gray slime. My heart froze. "You didn't go down there, did you, Elias?" Marcus asked. His voice was beginning to change, becoming low, gravelly, and distorted. I backed a ways, hitting the revolving door. "The rule is simple," Marcus said, his eyes beginning to turn black. "You watch the monitors, and you never, ever open the doors." Suddenly, the 16 monitors behind him flickered. Every single screen showed the same thing, me, standing at the exit. But on the screens, there were hundreds of pale, thin hands reaching out from the shadows behind me, grabbing for my throat. I didn't wait for him to finish. I threw my body against the revolving door and burst out into the night air. I ran. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't look back at the forest. I ran until I reached the main road and flagged down a passing truck. I quit the next day. I didn't even go back for my final paycheck. I moved to a different city, a place with bright lights and no basements. But every night, at exactly Shaolanda, my phone buzzes. It's a text message from an unknown number. It's a photo, a grainy security camera shot of me, sleeping in my new bed, and in the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the shadows, is a small, pale pair of feet, swinging back and forth. I don't trust GPS anymore. Not after that night. I was driving from Ohio to Pennsylvania, a 6-hour trip through the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. It was late, well past midnight. The road was a ribbon of black asphalt winding through a sea of dark, ancient trees. My dashboard lights were the only comfort I had. Everything else was void. I was tired. My eyes were heavy, so when the GPS suggested a shortcut through a narrow forest road, I took it. I just wanted to be home. The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. The road was barely wide enough for my SUV. The trees on either side leaned inward, their branches clawing at my roof like skeletal fingers. Scritch, scritch, scrape. I turned up the radio to drown out the sound, but the signal was gone. Just a static, low, rhythmic static that sounded like breathing. Suddenly, my headlights hit something in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. My tires screeched, and I skidded to a halt just inches away from a figure. It was a woman. She was wearing a tattered white dress, standing perfectly still, facing away from me. Her hair was long, black, and matted with what looked like dried mud. "Hey!" I yelled through the glass. "Are you okay?" She didn't move. She didn't even flinch. I honked the horn. The sound echoed through the woods, flat and dead. Slowly, very slowly, she began to turn, but her body didn't move, only her head. It twisted, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, until she was looking directly at me over her own spine. She had no eyes, just empty, weeping holes. I didn't think. I shifted into reverse and slammed the gas, but the car didn't move. I looked at the rearview camera. Behind me, standing in the middle of the road I had just driven down, were dozens of them. Men, women, children, all in white, all with their heads twisted backward, and they were all smiling. I was trapped. Then, the GPS spoke. Its voice was no longer the smooth AI woman. It was a distorted, demonic growl. In 500 feet new DIE, the GPS growled, and the screen turned deep, bloody red. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked back at the woman in front of the car. Her head was still twisted, those empty sockets staring into my soul. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be a sitting duck. I slammed the gear into drive, closed my eyes, and floored it. I expected a thud. I expected the sound of a body hitting metal, but there was nothing. I opened my eyes and looked in the rearview mirror. The road was empty. The woman, the crowd behind me, they had vanished into the mist. "Just a hallucination," I whispered, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "You're just tired. Just drive." The road began to slope downward, deeper into the valley. The fog became so thick I could barely see 3 feet in front of my hood. Then, the smell hit me. It was the smell of burning rubber and charred meat. I rounded a sharp corner and saw a flickering orange glow. A car was flipped over in the middle of the road, engulfed in flames. I slowed down. As I got closer, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just any car. It was a silver SUV, exactly like mine. Even the license plate was the same. I stopped the car, paralyzed. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Through the shattered window of the burning wreck, I saw a hand. On the wrist was a watch, a silver watch with a cracked face, the exact same watch I was wearing right now. Suddenly, the car's interior lights flickered on. I looked in the passenger seat. The woman in the white dress was sitting there. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the GPS screen. Her twisted head slowly turned toward me. This time, she wasn't smiling. She opened her mouth, and a thick, black liquid began to pour out. "You're late," she croaked. Then, she reached out and grabbed the steering wheel. The car accelerated on its own. The brakes were dead. The steering was locked. We were heading straight for the cliffside. "No," I screamed, pulling at the handle, but the door was sealed. The car soared off the edge, into the bottomless, black abyss. The car didn't crash. There was no impact, no sound of twisting metal, no fire. The sensation of falling just stopped. I opened my eyes. I was still sitting in my SUV. The engine was idling, a low, steady hum. But I wasn't on the road, and I wasn't at the bottom of a cliff. I was parked in the middle of a vast, endless field of tall, dead grass. The sky above wasn't black anymore. It was a bruised, sickly purple. There were no stars, no moon, just an infinite glowing haze. I looked at the passenger seat. The woman was gone, but the black liquid she had spit out was still there, sizzling on the leather seat like acid. I checked the GPS. The screen was cracked, but the map was still visible. There were no roads, no cities, just a single, blinking dot in the center of a void. Underneath the dot, a single word was typed, HOME. I looked out the window. In the distance, maybe a mile away, I saw a house. It looked exactly like my childhood home. The white porch, the blue shutters, the old oak tree in the front yard. But something was wrong. The house was flickering. Every few seconds, it would glitch, shifting into a rotting, skeletal ruin before snapping back to normal. Thump. Something hit the back of my car. I looked in the rearview mirror. It was the man from the road, the one with the twisted head. He was standing on his hands, his legs bent over his back at an impossible angle. Then another one appeared, and another. They were crawling out of the tall grass like insects. Hundreds of them. They weren't screaming. They were whispering, a low buzzing sound that filled the cabin of the car. Enter. The house. Enter. The house. My car door suddenly unlocked with a loud, metallic click. The engine died. The headlights flickered out. The whispering got louder. They were surrounding the car now, their pale, distorted faces pressing against the glass. Their breath fogged up the windows, leaving behind streaks of that same black liquid. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight from the glove box. It was the only weapon I had. I had to get to that house. If that was home, maybe there was a way out. I kicked the door open. The cold air hit me like a physical blow. It didn't smell like trees or rain. It smelled like old dust. I started to run. The grass pulled at my legs, like hundreds of small, invisible hands. Behind me, I heard the sound of 1,000 joints cracking at once. They were coming, and they weren't crawling anymore. They were sprinting. I ran, my lungs burning like they were filled with acid. The house was closer now, but the glitching was getting worse. 1 second, it was my warm childhood home. The next, it was a charred, blackened husk. The sound behind me was like a hailstorm of breaking bones. Crack, snap, crack. I reached the porch and scrambled up the wooden steps. I grabbed the handle and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and sliding the deadbolt. Silence. The whispering stopped. The cracking stopped. I stood in the entryway, gasping, my heart hammering against my chest. The house felt real. I could smell my mom's cinnamon candles. I could see the old family photos on the wall. "Mon?" I called out. My voice sounded small, fragile. "In the kitchen, honey," a voice replied. It was her, exactly as I remembered. I walked toward the kitchen, tears of relief stinging my eyes. I turned the corner, and there she was, standing at the stove, her back to me. "I took a wrong turn, Mom." I saw things on the road." "I know," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "The GPS always brings them here eventually." She slowly started to turn around. "Mom, your neck." Her head didn't stop at her shoulder. It kept turning, around and around, like a screw being tightened. "You're not home, honey," she whispered. The walls of the kitchen began to melt away, turning into the same black liquid I had seen in the car. The floorboards vanished, leaving me standing on a narrow, crumbling road in the middle of the void. I looked down at my hands. My skin was turning pale, translucent, blue. I reached up to my face and felt my jaw beginning to shift, my neck beginning to twist. I looked back at the road. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A silver SUV was driving toward me, slowing down as the driver saw me standing in the middle of the asphalt. I wanted to scream, to tell them to run, to turn back. But when I opened my mouth, only black liquid came out. I wasn't the driver anymore. I was the shortcut. The GPS in the approaching car chirped, a demonic, distorted growl. You have arrived. My head finished its final turn, until I was looking directly at the driver over my own spine. I began to smile,